It's been a few weeks since F1 2019 was released, and the other day I was having some fun with the classic cars that appear in the game. As I was bashing wheels with the AI and probably causing hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of irreparable damage to these iconic machines, I had a thought. How do these classic cars compare to their counterparts on the old F1 games? As I've got most of the console F1 games going back to the early 90s, I thought I would carry out an experiment. Drive a lap on them in the same car, at the same track, and see what happens. I wasn't exactly sure what results I was hoping to get from this, and my massively varying driving ability makes the lap time comparisons about as useful as the Williams R&D department. But it's interesting to see just how far F1 games have moved on over the past 20 to 30 years. So without further ado, let's get started. Off we go then, and we're taking the championship winning Red Bull RB6 for a spin around the legendary Spa-Francorchamps circuit in Belgium. This is the most recent classic car in F1 2019. I'd written classic in inverted commas on my script as it's not even a decade old yet. However, it does give us a chance to compare how the Codemasters F1 games have developed during that time. F1 2010 was the first Formula 1 game on the PlayStation in 4 years, and Codemasters' first proper release, if you ignore the half-hearted 2009 one they put out for the Wii and the PSP. At the time, I remember thinking how amazing the graphics were, sat in my bedroom thinking, "Core, it's like I'm really there!" It looks a little bit iffy now though, next to the new one. Still, it was, and remains in fact, a pretty decent F1 game. The handling wasn't too difficult to get the hang of again, unlike some of the other games you'll see later on. That is one thing I noticed while doing this, that the handling has come on massively over the last few decades of F1 games. It's probably partly down to the controllers getting better as well, so the discrepancy might not be as evident with a steering wheel. To give you a quick overview of how I did this, basically I went into the time trial mode on the games which had a time trial mode, or a practice session for the ones that didn't, and tried to set a reasonable lap. I'd say probably 90% of them were invalidated for corner cutting. This one was proper strict for that. Even when I still had 2 tyres on the track, it would get angry. "Stop cheating, you scumbag!" would often come up on the screen. So when I did finally set a valid lap, I was often so relieved that I tended to move on to the next car and track, which is why some of these laps will be a little bit scruffy. The rest of them are just plain crap. Anyway, we're coming to the end of this lap now, and F1 2019 is a little bit ahead. I think if I did enough laps on F1 2010, it would eventually have been quicker, or at least very similar. However, a 151 and a 152 are both still quite a lot slower than what this car managed in real life. Then again, I'm not a professional F1 driver, so give me a bit of leeway. Aha, F1 Championship Edition. It's good to see this one again. As there were no F1 games for the PlayStation in 2007, 2008 or 2009, I pretty much played this one solidly for about 4 years. This was one of the first games that was released for the PlayStation 3, and it's essentially a remastered version of F1 2006, which was already out on the PS2. The graphics were stunning, and they still look good now. It was easy to play, online multiplayer was a laugh, and the career mode was great fun. I remember one career mode season I did. I was in a Toyota and out of contention for the championship. Going into the last race, Giancarlo Fisichella had a 9-point lead in the standings over Michael Schumacher. I'd had a good season in my Toyota though. So good in fact that ahead of the final race, Renault hired me and sacked Fisichella with immediate effect. Schumacher then won the race and took the championship by a point. Well done, Flavio! Now, as much as I loved this game, it had a few flaws. I always found on some tracks, usually Spain or Silverstone, the AI were unbeatable. They were also dominant in the wet. It didn't matter what car I was in, I wasn't scoring in those races. And in the same way, there were tracks where I always seemed blisteringly quick. I'd normally win at Magny Cours every single season, so in a way it's a shame that that track's not around anymore. As we reach the end of this lap, it's interesting to see that F1 Championship Edition is a couple of seconds quicker, especially seeing as I hit the wall at one point as well. Quite a big gap between the two for a relatively short circuit. You can immediately see we're in the PS2 era now. This is F1 2004, probably one of the more forgettable games of the franchise, at least for me. I could never get to grips with this one. The handling was difficult to get the knack of, evident on this lap as I go off a couple of times. The rear of the car was always sliding out, even with traction control turned on. Every time you went around a corner you'd be fighting to keep the slightest semblance of control. If I hadn't craftily placed the F104 logo over the lap counter, you'd see that this was my 7th attempt at setting a valid lap. It was also the only one I managed as laps 8 and 9 went down the toilet, at which point I gave up. When I was choosing tracks for these lap comparisons, I was trying to make sure I picked ones which had largely the same layout back then as it does now. Silverstone, for instance, is a completely different track today to what it was in the 90s and noughties, so I've left it out. Bahrain though doesn't seem to have changed a bit. I know they use that weird and ultimately boring elongated version in 2010, but apart from that it's been pretty much the same since it first appeared on the F1 calendar in 2004. The only difference is it's got floodlights now. Now before we leave F104, I should mention the infamous pit stop glitch. On the original release there was a bizarre bug where if an AI driver went into the pits, other drivers would sometimes slow down to pit lane speed as well, even though they were still out on the track. The ones that didn't slow down would then plough into the back of them. I don't remember seeing it happen myself, but it sounds pretty funny. That's the end of the lap, and I wouldn't read too much into those lap times as my F104 run was dire, so let's just move on. It's the first Williams of the video, and probably their last car that was a genuine championship contender. Both Montoya and Ralf Schumacher won a couple of races each in 2003, and Juan Pablo was right in the title fight until the penultimate race before ultimately finishing third in the standings, behind Kimi Räikkönen and the other, more successful Schumacher. Hockenheim was actually one of the races Montoya won, and it was quite an entertaining event if I remember correctly, with a big start line crash, late puncture dramas, all sorts of nonsense going on. Anyway, back to the games. Formula 1 2003 was the start of the run of the PlayStation exclusive games, and again I wasn't overly keen on it. Like a lot of the F1 games from around this era, it was tricky to control, and 12-year-old me could never really get used to it. There's a lot of similarities to F104 in that sense. The back of the car seems to be trying to drive somewhere else to where the front's pointing. A quick point about the track. You might have noticed the 2003 turn 7, that's the right-hander after the hairpin. It's much tighter than in F1 2019, to the point that I couldn't do it flat. I don't remember that being a thing, and having just watched a video of the 2003 race, it wasn't, so who knows what the developers are up to there. I mean, by that point it had been a couple of years since they redid the track. How can you get it so wrong? So because of that we have yet more inconclusive data on this quest to find out whatever it is we're trying to find out. What's next? F1 2019 doesn't have this Ferrari, so I've had to go back to 2018 for this test. We're up against Formula 1 2002, so let's get these super fast laps around Monza started. Oh wait, hang on. Didn't EA do an F1 game in 2002 as well? Well, I can't be forgetting that one now. Hold on a second. That's better. So it's F1 2018 versus Formula 1 2002 versus F1 2002. Whoever would have thought you'd need so many games to race 2002 cars on? Actually, wasn't there another one? That arcadey thing that Atari slapped their name on. Grand Prix Challenge? Let's go again. Right, that's definitely it now, or at least for the ones I own. I suppose if I'd really wanted to, I could have thrown F1 Career Challenge in here as well, as that includes 2002 within it. But that might have been getting silly. Besides, that's EA again anyway. As you may be able to tell, this was the last year before the period of one game exclusivity, and it seems like everyone was having a crack at making an F1 game. To be honest, I never played Formula 1 2002 much. I'm not even sure how I ended up with a copy, so I don't have a lot to say about it, other than that it's got that weird handling again. I don't remember a lot about Grand Prix Challenge either, although I do actually remember buying this one from the Banbury branch of Morrison's. It's much more of an arcade racer, and out of all the games I played for this video, it was probably the worst. Hence why the lap time you'll see shortly is so woeful. I did play the EA version though, a lot. In fact, as I wasn't particularly keen on F103 and 04, I regularly went back to this one until F105 came out. Looking at it now though, I'd say it's probably got the crappiest graphics out of this group. The car seems a lot wider than the others, although that could just be the camera angle. The best thing about the EA game though when I was growing up was the 2-player mode. Having a friend over who didn't even like F1 and spending hours doing a full season together was great fun, even when it's set to easy and we'd win every race between us. I know you have the online multiplayer these days, but it would be nice for a proper 2-player mode to make a comeback. I'll quickly mention that the start and finish line was further down the track in 2002, in case you're wondering why 2018 looked further back than it was. Here's the times, and it's a thumping win for EA. I must have made some microtransactions to make the car go quicker. We've gone from the PS2 to the PS1 for Formula 1 98, the highly anticipated sequel to, funnily enough, Formula 1 97. I've been looking forward to talking about this one, not because I have fond memories of playing it as a child or anything like that. No, quite the opposite in fact. This game was garbage. Okay, that might be a bit harsh, but it certainly seemed like a backward step from 97, and indeed 95. There was a very rushed feel to it, probably because it was rushed. I could talk about handling again, which is crap, but what I want to focus on is this game's representation of the 1998 champion himself, Mika Häkkinen. Now obviously Häkkinen and the McLaren you're watching now was a very successful combination. However, in this game he's been transformed into a god. I've done a championship mode on here where the Flying Finn has won every single race. No exaggeration. I even did a race where the game claimed he'd lap me, and therefore forced me to finish a lap early, even though he was nowhere to be seen. When you're doing a full season though, it would get pretty tiresome seeing the same bloke win every single race. Just imagine someone in a silver, Mercedes-powered car doing that in real life today. It was such a disappointment after F1 97. Although saying that, it does seem to be quick. It's the first lap I've done where I've beaten the real life equivalent. This is where it all began for me. Formula 1, sometimes known as F1 95 as it's based on that year, is one of the all-time classics. Although saying that, while editing this I picked up on a major problem I'd never noticed before. All will be revealed shortly. I first played this a few years after it came out round a friend's house. It was probably around 1998, and aged 7 I'd just started to get into F1. This exciting sport where everyone crashed into each other, and now I could join in the fun as well on the PlayStation. I would spend hours playing this game, doing full seasons, and even 78 lap races around Monaco on the easiest setting, just so I could win by about 6 laps. To be honest, it's quite strange why they picked the 1995 Ferrari to use as a classic car. They have taken it off F1 2019, which is why we're back on 2018 again, but it was only the 3rd best car of the season performance-wise, and only won 1 race. It was the last ever V12 powered car to race in Formula 1 however, so I guess that must be the reason. And because of that it did sound good. This, along with the 1998 McLaren you've just seen, are probably my 2 favourite F1 engine noises. What about this major problem though? Well, if you look at the 2 cars, you'll see they've been going around at roughly the same speed. Maybe 2018 is slightly ahead, but the lap times should be pretty close, yeah? This game's timer has been lying to us for more than 20 years. I had to guess the actual lap time. Unbelievable! I know I said earlier that Grand Prix Challenge was the worst game I put myself through for this video, but on reflection it's definitely Nigel Mansell's World Championship Racing. That's even taken into account it's 27 years old. We've gone back beyond the PS1 to the Super Nintendo, and first of all I feel I need to apologise for the disgusting layout of the screen. This is the only view you get, which means that half the screen is taken up by the sky. For that reason I've had to chop it in half horizontally, but F1 2019 doesn't work that way round, so it's all ended up in a bit of a mess. I need to fill that big black box up with something. Hopefully a cheery Nigel will do the trick. There we go! Anyway, back to the game. As you won't be able to see from the bottom half of the screen, we're at SUZUKA, or a very vague representation of SUZUKA. The circuit owners seem to have removed all the grandstands, pit lane, fairground, basically everything for miles around. When you do actual races on this, it only had one driver for each team as well. Obviously Mansell's in it, so that means no Riccardo Patrese, Schumacher's in, so Brundle's out, and as McLaren's drivers in 1992 were Ayrton Senna and Gerhard Berger, which one do you think they picked? Well, no actually, they went for Berger. It didn't really matter though, as you couldn't play as them anyway. Your only option was to drive as Mansell. I suppose that made sense though. It was Nigel Mansell's World Championship racing after all, as opposed to F1 1992. Okay, we've determined this game is crap, so let's actually take a moment to talk about F1 2019. Obviously I've been having some fun with the classic cars here, but it's worth saying that the main game is brilliant too. The last few years these games have, for me anyway, been getting better each year. Ignore 2015 because that one was awful, but 2016 was good and they've been steadily improving since then. I was a bit worried 2019 would be rushed as it's been released earlier than in recent years, but I've been really impressed with it. If you haven't played it yet, I would highly recommend it. You could probably set much better laps than I've been managing as well. So now Nigel Mansell's finally finished his lap of wherever that was, it's time for the overall results. Right, I've got all these lap times and I've no idea what conclusion it's meant to bring me to. The laps weren't clean and pretty much all of them could be improved by at least a couple of seconds. The newer games were fastest in 5 of the tests, and only the 1995 Ferrari was quicker than Gerhard Berger's real life qualifying time. Maybe that's more of a reflection on Gerhard though than the game. As the lap times are essentially meaningless, let's ignore them and instead rank the old games on how much I enjoy playing them. Obviously this is just my personal opinion, and me enjoying one more than another doesn't necessarily mean it's a better game. There you go. Probably no surprises what games are at the top and bottom of this list. There's probably quite a big gap between 4th and 5th though. Well, I hope that proved to be interesting. All that's left for me to say is thank you all very much for watching, and goodbye.